Hey everyone, I'm WRAL News Plus anchor Elizabeth Holmes, and you are watching On the Record. If you like our videos, be sure to like and subscribe so you can always stay up to date with the latest information. For this episode, we are talking to WRAL sports investigative reporter Brian Murphy about the possibility of Major League Baseball coming to North Carolina, specifically to Raleigh. There are a couple billionaires who are interested in bringing a team to Raleigh and some state lawmakers too, and they say they could set aside potentially some money to make it happen. Here's our conversation. A lot of talk about Major League Baseball coming to North Carolina. I think this would be maybe exciting for a lot of people.
Yeah, I mean, what felt kind of like a long shot just 6 months ago, a year ago, really feels like there's some momentum behind it. I mean, you have the governor of the state talking about it. You have the Senate leader, Phil Berger, talking about it. You have multiple billionaires now talking about it. And now there are some financing things that seem to be falling into place.
Yeah, and you and the NC Capitol team here at WRAL have reported on the state legislature possibly trying to fund a stadium project for this. What's all that about?
Yeah, well, my colleague Jack Hagel and I reported about there's roughly $600 million. There's a little bit more than that in this economic fund, this economic development fund that could be moved over into infrastructure planning or infrastructure for a new stadium. Now we're talking probably going to be about $2 billion for a new stadium. So this wouldn't cover the costs entirely. But at a time where Major League Baseball and the NFL and all these sports organizations don't want their owners to have to fund the bill for an entire stadium, state support, local support is going to be important in building one of these stadiums. And so to have the state even consider using $600 to $700 million and possibly increasing taxing authority for Wake County to provide another stream of revenue, and those are all big steps as MLB thinks about expanding later in the decade.
And you just mentioned the fact that there are some very wealthy people who are also eyeing North Carolina as this. Why are they looking at Raleigh as a possible next place for Major League Baseball?
Yeah, well, Tom Dundon owns the Carolina Hurricanes, and he's been speaking for several years now about bringing a Major League Baseball team to this area. I think we've seen with the Hurricanes' run to the Stanley Cup, just the enthusiasm and the fan base and the support that exists in this area for big league sports. And I think everyone kind of wants to capitalize on that. And so Tom Dundon's been talking about it for a long time. Last week, I talked to Mark Lazary. He's a guy, private equity manager who has been invested in lots of other teams, including the Milwaukee Bucks for a while. And now he's interested, and he is an investor in the North Carolina Courage, the women's soccer team here in Raleigh or in Cary. And now he wants to get involved. And he basically said, like, I want to make a bet on Raleigh over the next 5, 10, 20 years. It's an area that's going to grow. There's a lot of talk that North Carolina will be the 7th most populous state in the country. And we don't have a Major League Baseball team. We'd be the biggest state that doesn't have a Major League Baseball team. And so I just think, a lot of people want to invest in this market, a growing market, an affluent market, and one after the Carolina Hurricanes just won the Stanley Cup that you see will rally behind professional sports.
Right. And I think it's interesting, too, the fact that, officials with Major League Baseball, they want something done quickly, between now and 2029. So what are maybe some other places that Raleigh might have to compete against for this?
Yeah, I think the mayor talked about by 2027, Raleigh has to have their bid together. And so that, you think about it, we're already midway through 2026. It's not a ton of time. And they're going to be competing against Nashville as the name that always comes up. Nashville has a very strong group together trying to bring Nashville baseball to Nashville. They don't really have an owner, and they've also spent a lot of money on their football stadium. And so how much appetite is there for the public to fund another big stadium that would be required for Major League Baseball? There's a whole litany of cities. I mean, obviously Charlotte has come up from time to time. Out west, Portland and Salt Lake City. People have talked about Austin. People have talked about Montreal, which used to have a Major League Baseball team and doesn't anymore. Possibly Vancouver. So there are a lot of cities. Sacramento, which is hosting the A's right now, but they're moving to Las Vegas, so Sacramento wants to get a team. There are a lot of cities. Major League Baseball hasn't expanded since the late 1990s. So you're talking about 30 years since the last expansion, and not many teams have moved in that time period either. So if you're going to get a team, this is probably your best bet is to get in on this expansion.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, North Carolina, I feel like it's just rapidly growing. We hear the stats all the time. But specifically, coming from lawmakers, they were discussing the budget. So what is new when it comes to the budget and how this will be paid for?
Yeah, so the lawmakers set aside about $730 million in the last budget that passed. That was 2023. We're way behind on getting a budget. We should have had one last year. We still don't have one. But the 2023 budget moved about $730 million into this economic development fund. And now the question is what to do with that money. You can leave it in the reserve account, and it can be used for anything, or you can move it to potentially a state agency and earmark it for something specific. So you could earmark it specifically for sports infrastructure. Maybe some of it gets used for a soccer stadium. Maybe some of it gets used for a baseball stadium. But you could earmark exactly where that goes, as opposed to where it is now that any legislature at any point can decide to tap into that money and use it for whatever they want. So this would be, sort of designating this bucket of money, and we don't know if it would be all of the money or some of the money or fraction of the money, but this would be designating some of that money for the specific purpose of sports infrastructure. There's a couple other things that Senator Berger talked about today. Right now, there's a 6% occupancy tax in Wake County. So if you stay at a hotel in Wake County, you get charged 6%, and that money goes to a fund that is then used for arts projects, sports projects, convention center. We're seeing some of that used for the Lenovo Center renovation, some being used for the new convention center, some being used to move Red Hat Amphitheater. There's talk about that going up potentially to 8%, potentially to 10%, and that would bring in more revenue without necessarily taxing the citizens of North Carolina. This would be taxing people who come to visit. And so that would be another revenue stream. There's also a major events and attractions fund that is funded by sports gambling money. And it has way more money than it ever thought it would because sports gambling has done better than they thought it would. So that's another pot of money that potentially could be tapped into at some point to attract a Major League Baseball franchise.
And I assume that makes North Carolina all the much more attractive, seeing this kind of revenue stream.
Yeah, I mean, I think, so many cities are going through these budget crunches and or so many states as well. And you see there's a big pushback against publicly financing stadiums. And that's a debate I'm sure that we're going to have here in North Carolina. But we've seen it in Las Vegas with the A's. We've seen it in Tampa with the Rays. We're seeing it in Chicago right now with the Chicago Bears, one of the most popular franchises in NFL history. They're potentially moving to Indiana because they have not been able to get a deal worked out with either the city of Chicago or the state of Illinois. So these are massive projects, costing in the billions of dollars. And a lot of cities and states are saying no. Like, you fund it. It's your money, you fund it. And so to have a state and maybe a county like Wake County decide, yes, we're going to invest in this, would probably push Raleigh high on the list of potential expansion teams.
Does the state have any experience, I guess, running a big stadium, like a stadium of this kind of stature? Yeah,
I mean, it would be an open question as to who's in charge of it. But, I mean, there is a blueprint to follow. When the Lenovo Center was built 30 years ago, it was called the Entertainment and Sports Arena at the time. It was built on state land. The state legislature helped fund that. That Wake County, through their hospitality taxes, helped fund it, and they created the Centennial Authority, a state-appointed board to run it. And the Centennial Authority, to this day, runs the arena. Now, they have basically handed those operations over to Gale Force and the Hurricanes, but they are still in charge. They still get to make budget decisions about how that arena is run. And Senator Berger mentioned today that is a formula they could use with a baseball stadium. They could create a new Centennial Authority that would be in charge of the baseball stadium, and that would give sort of, a quasi-governmental leadership over the stadium. And then they could take out bonds, they could do various things and run this organization. So the state's not necessarily running it. You're not running it from the governor's mansion or from the state legislature, but there are people appointed by those people to help run it and run it in a manner that benefits not just the team, but the entire state.
So let's say that this goes forward and a new stadium would be built. Where would it even be built?
I mean, that's a great question. There is a lot of state-owned land. If we look to the Lenovo Center as an example, the Lenovo Center is built on state land. The state owns that land. They still own it to this day. And they just gave Tom Dundon and the Hurricanes the rights to develop the area around it, but that's a lease. That's a 99-year lease. The state government owns that land. Well, guess what? There's a lot of state government-owned land around Raleigh, particularly around where the Lenovo Center Carter Finley complex is. I don't think it would be built on the actual grounds where the parking lots are that are going to be developed, those 80 acres, but there's a lot, thousands of acres around there that is owned by the state, and you could see some sort of swap or something, maybe the land would be gifted to build a stadium, but the state would still own that land. And so eventually, they could do some things with it that they wanted to. So I think I really look to the Lenovo Center as sort of the model for how this might happen.
That's interesting. So obviously, we have this model. We have maybe, one step in the door of getting this. But what is the actual likelihood of this becoming a reality?
I think it's still very small, right? I mean, for any city, there's not like an overwhelming favorite. The NBA is going through expansion right now. They've sort of earmarked Seattle and Las Vegas. Think about all the cities out there that would love to have a basketball team. Kansas City, for example, Vancouver. There are lots of cities that would love to have a basketball team, but Seattle and Vegas are sort of the favorites to get it. I think in baseball, there are no real favorites. It's kind of a wide open process, and you figure there'll be 10 to 15 cities that have legitimate bids. Well, can Raleigh rise to the top of that list? Because they're only going to choose 2 cities. Major League Baseball has 30 teams. You can see them going to 32. That also, this isn't going to happen until 2029. Before 2029, Major League Baseball has to negotiate a new collective bargaining agreement with its Players Association. And Major League Baseball wants to institute a salary cap. They want to make massive changes to the draft. These are things that the Players Association is probably going to be against. They're definitely against the salary cap, which could lead to a long work stoppage, either a strike or a lockout. Some are worried that the entire 2027 season might get wiped out by this labor strife. In that case, does expansion go to the back burner? Does expansion move to the forefront as owners try to make up some of that money by getting expansion fees? So there's a lot of events that have to happen outside of Raleigh's control. And then when you finally get all that done, there'll be an expansion process. And will Raleigh's bid be better than Nashville, be better than Charlotte, be better than Montreal? I would imagine they'll put one team in the East and one team in the West. So, you're kind of cutting the competition in half, but still Raleigh will have to beat out Nashville, Charlotte, Montreal, maybe San Juan, Puerto Rico. I mean, there may be other cities that get involved that have very strong bids as well.
So a lot to watch, a lot to watch here. In terms of just what happens next, what are you looking for specifically when it comes to these, discussions?
Yeah, well, the budget still hasn't passed, right? What we reported is that there are discussions about this. Well, Senator Berger and the Senate seem to be on board with this. We don't really know if the House agrees with that. So the first thing I'm looking for is what does actually appear in the budget that gets passed. That may pass before July 4th. It may pass slightly after July 4th. But do they get this money in the budget? Do they get increased taxing authority for Wake County in the budget? So much of this is controlled through the budget process. I'll be interested to see that. I'll be interested to see what Tom Dundon, now coming off the Stanley Cup win, what happens to the development around Lenovo Center. I think all these things are kind of connected, but that first next step, I think, is what's in the budget. Does all this money get put in the budget? Do we start to see the state step up and try to at least supplement a bid for an MLB team?
Interesting. Well, a lot to look forward to. I feel like a lot of people would be excited if it came to North Carolina, but we also got to be realistic at the same time.
Yeah, but I mean, just to be in the game.
Yeah.
I think that's a year ago, 2 years ago, I'm not sure people would have thought Raleigh's even in the game. Mm-hmm. And I think certainly now Raleigh is ahead of Charlotte. And probably competing, right neck and neck with Nashville right now. And so I think that's exciting. And for all the fans who got excited about the Hurricanes, the thought of having another pro team in this area in the summertime, I think is very exciting as well.
That was my conversation with Brian Murphy. We hope you enjoyed it. And of course, again, if you like content like this, be sure to like and subscribe. And you can always find more of Brian's stories on our website, WRAL.com.